Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Looking for a professional website without breaking a budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960, or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can also watch our videos on the YouTube channel at the Mike Wagner Show on YouTube. You can also download and listen to our audio on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and also watch the interview on YouTube as well. And don't forget to check us out on iHeartRadio. The Mike Wagner Show, just take us with you wherever you go on any mobile device. We're here with a wonderful gentleman, an actor, violinist, a Broadway performer. He's also won quite a few awards, and he's from the New York, Brooklyn area. He's appeared in Law and Order, Days and Nights of Molly Dodd, All My Children, Henry's Crime, and he's also been in quite a few Broadway musicals. The Boys Are Back, Madam Secretary, Fearless, Blue Bloods, and many, many more. He also wrote some books, music, and lyrics to the bridge, and also plays the violin in quite a few appearances as well, too. As a graduate of New York University and a member of BNI Music, the workshop. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a very special presentation, and he's going to play a few pieces for us. The very, very multi-talented, live from Brooklyn, Drew McVety. Drew, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. Happy to be here.
Yes, it's always glad to have you here. A good 365 to you as well, too. You've been an actor and a violinist and been on Broadway for a number of years. You've been on Law and Order, Days and Nights of Molly Dodd, All My Children, Henry's Crime, and you also won a few special awards as well, too. You also been nominated, and you just have a very, very long list. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first of all, tell us how you got started.
How I got started? Well, I started studying violin when I was 5 years old in Port Huron, Michigan, and actually studied in Canada, right across the river, growing up in Michigan, because there were no string programs in Port Huron when I was growing up. But there was a very active Suzuki violin program, started in Sarnia, Ontario, and I studied violin from the time I was 5 until now, which is 50 years later. And I was also in my first community theater play when I was 5, The Music Man at the Port Huron Little Theater. So it all started early and in earnest, the music and the theater, neck and neck. And they've always just fed each other.
It seems to work together as well, too. And you've been, violin for a number of years, and you also tied into Broadway as well, too. And how do you manage to tie those two together, and how'd you get started on Broadway?
That's funny. I remember a long time ago, maybe back, I went to New York University in 1983, and I was on Broadway in my first production in 1988 with Heidi. So that was many years ago now. And since then, I've done 12 Broadway productions. But I remember somebody at that point saying, "Oh my gosh, what would you do if you had your Carnegie Hall concert scheduled the same night as your Broadway opening?" And I thank God that those were my problems. That was the issue. That's never come to pass, that I've had such a scheduling conflict that brought me down. But I have been able to, in several shows, bring the playing in, or I've been a composer on the show, or it's worked into the character that the character happens to be a violinist, or I get a show that's completely separate from being a violinist, or I get a job that's only about playing the violin. So it's all just worked together. I play guitar and piano and trombone and pretty much all the instruments. When I was a kid, I decided that I was going to learn how to play a woodwind, a brass, a string, and a percussion, and then that way all my bases would be covered. If anybody ever asked me to play any instrument. And that's usually the case. I can usually figure out a way to make something sweet come out of whatever you give me, instrument-wise.
That is amazing. I mean, you can do so much with what you got. And what are some real plays you've been in that involve you as a violin on stage, incorporating into the play? Like, say, with you've been on with Sting and The Last Ship, and also in Songbird. And what are some of the other plays you've been in where you actually did a violin, where you actually were involved in the play itself, not in the background.
Right. Both of those that you mentioned, Sting's The Last Ship, I opened up the second act with a fiddle solo, which was just, come on, a complete dream come true. Playing Sting's music with Sting in a Broadway show was really a time when my mind was blown. I just couldn't believe that all those things were happening at the same time. And then Songbird, which is an amazing piece, we've done 2 times now, off Broadway and out at a theater called the Two Rivers Theater in New Jersey, which a modern day musical adaptation of Chekhov's Seagull, set in Nashville with Nashville songwriters and musicians rather than Russian actors and actresses. And all of the characters in that are associated with a specific instrument and play it as they go through. You know, I was playing Doc, who was also a great fiddle player and songwriter. And let's see, what other ones? Titanic, which is my first musical on Broadway, I had to cover on stage. I was hired as a standby, and I had to cover all the on-stage musicians, which meant all the guys who were playing as the ship went down. So I had to cover and learn how to play the bass and the cello as well as the violin. And I think some piano too, some keyboard. Cyrano de Bergerac, I was playing a lot of violin in that, as well as being a swashbuckling swordsman. And I would carry the violin on my belt as if it were a sword, which was hard on the violin, but we all survived. What else? Oh, Cabaret, the original production of Cabaret, or the original remounting of Cabaret that happened in 1998, I think. I did the national tour. This was directed by Sam Mendes. And that had everybody was one of the first Broadway shows that had all the actors as musicians as well. So the Kit Kat Club was truly played. All the instruments were truly played by all the actors in it. Played a lot of violin in that. I think that's it for the Broadway shows and the instruments. Another one will come up soon. I'll remember. There's a lot.
And I'm sure we got some time as well too. And what's it like working with Sting on stage?
Oh, Sting is everything you would hope a major celebrity would be. I mean, the guy is worth just about every dollar there is. He's, you know, once you start working with him, you realize how ubiquitous his music is. Everywhere you go, you realize that you're hearing every breath you take. And when you get to meet somebody of that level and they, you know, really learn your name and they really find out about you in life, and they, you know, he'll return an email in 10 minutes if I write him now. He's down to earth. He cared so much about his piece. He was at every rehearsal. Eventually, he jumped in the show himself. He wanted to do it so badly. He's just an all-around great guy. And his musicianship, it was of such a level, he just took everybody up with him. And I will be forever changed just because I got to play with that guy. He took me up a level, or 6. He, you know, if you ever watch what he does on stage, when he plays his bass and sings, it's phenomenal, because he'll be playing in one completely different tempo than what he's singing. And he does this all the time. I mean, that's that kind of polyphony in a performer is what Bach was able to do. And I put Sting up there. He's also, I mean, he's got a great book called Broken Music, which is life story. He's as eloquent as can be. He sits around and does cryptic crossword puzzles all day. He's a genius. He's a genius, and has, you know, really been an incredible businessman as well. He was a big influence, I have to say. Just getting to spend that time let me know what a human being could be. And his name is Gordon Sumner. Oddly, too, I have to say, going back to Canada and growing up and studying violin in Sarnia, one of the weird stories about doing The Last Ship was that one of the families I studied with as a boy, the Murrays, were from Sarnia, Ontario, and I was from Port Huron, Michigan, and we all studied violin together. Their children, Yvonne and Peter. And I knew they were from Britain, and I knew they had lovely accents and everything else, but they were people I grew up with and knew all my life. And then all of a sudden, I'd fallen out of touch with them. Then all of a sudden, I'm doing The Last Ship, and I get an email from Yvonne and Neil Murray saying they're going to come see the show because they grew up in exactly the same village, Newcastle upon Tyne, well, it's a city, that Wallsend is the village where Sting grew up, and his father was the milkman. And the Murrays grew up there too. And they had the same milkman, Sting's father, and they all knew each other. And it was an incredible, I mean, you wouldn't expect to be working with Sting in the first place, somebody at that level. And then somebody who you've known all your life to also have the same kind of, or more direct contact. So when all those people came together on the Broadway stage and we stood and talked afterwards, I was pretty overcome, because it was a big life journey to circle up and be around Sting, of all things.
It sounds like a great journey as well, too. And if you don't mind, maybe play a couple of pieces on the violin, maybe some police music, the Sting in just a minute. You listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Looking for a professional website without breaking a budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable, custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show. Get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can also check out our interview on YouTube at the Mike Wagner Show on YouTube channel as well. You can also download and listen on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also watch the interview on YouTube as well, too, and take the Mike Wagner Show with you wherever you go, wherever you do, on any mobile device. That's the Mike Wagner Show. We're here with actor, violinist, and Broadway performer Drew McVety, who grew up in Port Huron, Michigan, and made his way over to Brooklyn, New York as well, too, to be on Broadway. And we talked about some of his violinist work with Sting and the history of it. And, while I was taking a break here, and he got his violin tuned up, and perhaps, Drew, maybe you can play a few pieces for us.
A few pieces? Yeah, we can play something.
Sure.
Sting used to love it. I used to play in between the acts up in the flies. And Sting would love it when I would play a little Bach. He wanted me to go out in the audience and play Bach during the intermission, but we didn't know if that was such a good idea. But we thought it was a great idea. I think we should listen to everything Sting says, but I would play.
That is impressive. I love it. I love it.
Well, Sting did too, which drove me crazy. I couldn't believe it. I tell you, when you work with someone that iconic, and I've had the pleasure of working with several people like that over time, but people who maybe are on your radar the entire time you're growing up, and you never consider that you're actually going to meet them and work with them. Certainly, I mean, I didn't become a Broadway actor so I could work with Sting, and yet when he was there, it made all the sense in the world. And like I say, he's just a great guy.
It sounds like it's just amazing as well, too. And can you maybe play a police song or two on the violin?
What could I play? A police song. I'm trying to think.
Or just try maybe like a line or two. Just do an improv. If you can do it, that's great. If not, it's okay. You can also do another piece as well.
That's that. Here's something I wrote while I was there.
music in Sting's show, The Last Ship, was all very old folk English music that we were doing, and the stuff he wrote was just gorgeous.
That was beautiful, very beautiful. Bravo, bravo, very beautiful. Very beautiful. And then also going to touch up as well too. And you appeared in Law and Order, Days and Nights of Molly Dodd, All My Children, and also Henry's Crime on TV and movie. You can just tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, right after my first Broadway show, which was Heidi Chronicles in 1989, there was The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd, which I was lucky enough to get a reoccurring role on. Which was a terrific show starring Blair Brown, and shot out in Queens. And I got about 2 years in on that before it disappeared. Then, Law and Order, I think I appeared on every one of their franchise. I was in Criminal Intent and SVU and Law and Order, not SUV, SVU, that's right. Law and Order. At least 6 times over the 15 years, 18 years they were on shooting in New York, which was just terrific. I would show up, and I got to work with Jerry Orbach and with Belzer and Ice-T at one point, and I love doing that show. What else? Oh, well, the soap operas, yeah. All My Children, and which one did you mention? You said... was it All My Children, Another World, or I did all of those.
I think it was also Henry's Crime. I got on there.
Yeah, that was a feature film with Keanu Reeves and James Caan. That was super fun. I got to spend 3 or 4 days with Keanu Reeves, who's a very intense fellow, I have to tell you. In a prison out in Rikers, I believe we were, Rikers. Where we're shooting, which I didn't enjoy being in. I have to tell you, even if we're just working in the movie, I'd rather not go to the prison if I don't have to. It's a creepy feeling there. But it was great working with Keanu. He's a very, very interesting guy.
It does sound like it too. And of course, you mentioned James Caan as well too, one of the legends on the screen, and he was in Freebie and a Bean and quite a few others as well too. He was a big name from way back then. What was it like working with James Caan?
Well, I didn't actually get to do a scene with him. There's a disclaimer, but I did get to share lunch with him, and that was pretty wonderful. And he was in a good mood that day. He was telling plenty of jokes, and he was feeling good about himself. You could tell that. I'm such a open-mouthed fan of his. I was barely able to get out a couple of words. I was a little shy around him, I have to say. But when you get jobs like that and you have those kind of people in the room, you just feel happy to be there, and have to keep pinching yourself, realizing that it's true. I think I keep thinking about, I worked on Spamalot on Broadway, and that was just, an endless parade of people bucket list people I wanted to meet, starting with all the, when the Pythons would show up.
Oh, they're fantastic. I love Monty Python.
Yeah. And me too. I mean, that's how I learned how to do a British accent, was from watching, the Holy Grail and from watching Flying Circus late at night on the Canadian television stations that would come over into Michigan. And I thought I'd seen the funniest things I'd ever see in my life. And I think I was right. But when Eric Idle showed up, to the show to see it, and I met him, it's another reason to just put it on your bucket list and cross it off, I guess.
And what's it like working with rest of the Pythons as well, too, especially John Cleese, the leader of all? Right.
Again, I just got to do their material for them. I didn't get to work with them, which would be pretty amazing. But, I have to say, when I got the job in Spamalot, I expected not to like it as much as I did, because I did like all those performances and those performers so much. I liked Eric so much, and I liked John Cleese so much, and I liked Michael Palin so much that I thought, how are people going to capture what those guys had? And what became apparent when we did Spamalot was how great their writing was, because everybody was great in it, and it was because the writing was so great. And when they would show up to come see our performances, you felt all the confidence in the world because you were doing some of the best material in the world. And to have them enjoy it just made it, unbelievable. Also, we had Mike Nichols directing that piece, who was an idol of mine. And I remember auditioning for that. I went to the callback at the Schubert Theater on Broadway, and it was just me and another actor on stage I was reading some King Arthur, and had no idea that Mike Nichols was going to be there. And then looming up out of the audience, I saw the outline of those glasses, those iconic glasses that he would wear, and heard his voice and said, "Could you try it again?" It was amazing. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, here we go. And, again, so blessed to be able to work with that guy.
It sounds like you're having a fun time as well, too. And, just another thing with the violin, I love hearing the violin. Would you happen to play Camelot from Monty Python and the Holy Grail on violin? Would you like to give that a try, or maybe just a few?
You like requests.
Yes, that's right. You know what? I work in radio, and I love taking requests. That's what we do. So.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you get the idea. I couldn't figure that out.
Well, that song gets stuck in my head every single time. And I have to say, I must have watched it like, oh my gosh, I think 15 times already and still counting. And my daughter actually got me a DVD for Christmas, and I just keep that under there. And in case I just want to get in a silly mood or do a silly walk, I just put that on. So
yeah, big score. Funny.
Yes, that's right. Okay. We'll go over some of the other appearances have been in, also some influences. You listen to Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today at 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960, or email to support@SonicWebStudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 10% off your first order. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, the Mike Wagner Show can be heard on the MikeWagnerShow.com. You can also watch the interview on YouTube as well, too, at the Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. You can also download and listen to our audio version on Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also, watch the interview on YouTube as well, too. Take the Mike Wagner Show wherever you go and whatever you do on any mobile device. We're here with actor and Broadway performer and violinist Drew McVety. Coming from Port Huron, Michigan, all the way over to the New York area, now in Brooklyn. And we went over some great performances he's been in. And we also hit upon some others as well, too. I mean, we just have a huge list. And of course, you can fill in on some of the performances you think you've been great in. I'll throw in, like, say, Charles Ives' Take Me Home, or The Substance of Fire, or Tiny Mythic here, and Les Liaisons. And you can just tell us a little bit about that, what's memorable, and you can add your own stories to it on other plays we haven't mentioned.
Well, that is a piece I left out when we talked about characters who play the violin. The Charles Ives' Take Me Home was a piece written by my pal Jessica Dickey for me, I guess, that we did off Broadway at the Rattlestick Theater, a premiere of this play, which is about a guy who was obsessed with Charles Ives, the composer, and the violinist. So this was one of the times I could really incorporate both the crafts into one performance. And anytime I can find an actor who plays the violin in the character, it's always interesting. And this was super challenging. Charles Ives' music is incredibly dense and incredibly difficult. He's a fascinating character. And this play wound up being a bit like, it was a bit like the Twilight Zone in a way, because Charles Ives came back to, as a ghost kind of, to coach me through part of my life and difficulties I was having with my daughter through the music. And we had a nice little run off Broadway. And then I went and did it in Pittsburgh after that too, at the City Theater there. I'd love to do that piece again, actually. It's super challenging and super beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like a lot, too. You go from musical to musical to musical, and you seem to go nonstop. And I guess the question is, you're going a lot here. It's like, when do you take a break, and what do you do on your break? So I guess that's a big question out there.
Oh, that's a very good question. I try to avoid breaks as much as possible in a lot of ways, because they come inevitably. In the life of performing, you're going to get 4 or 5 weeks in between things sometimes. Here's the truth: is I'm lucky enough that the first things I got into on Broadway were not musicals. The first play I did on Broadway was the Heidi Chronicles. So, and then the second, and that went on to win the Pulitzer Prize and the Tony Award and the the Outer Critics Drama Circle and the Drama Desk Award. It won every award that it could. It was, the big success. And then because I was in a non-musical initially, I still get to audition for non-musical plays on Broadway. The second play I was in on Broadway was Titanic, which also won Best Musical Tony and also swept in its categories. So the first 2 shows I did out of the gate won Best in their category, musical and non-musical. And because of that, I get to be in both. Now, had I been in the musical first, this is just a rule of the business, I would be considered a musical theater actor and wouldn't be allowed to do the straight plays as well. Because it happened, it just fell out in that order. I'm lucky enough to be able to do film and television and musical theater as well. Because now in the business, I'm thought of as an actor who can sing as opposed to a musical theater actor, which is a kind of fascinating. But also just one of the very fortunate things that happened to me by luck.
That is amazing too. And you're talking about you being in one, but you can't do the other. Does that have to do with union or non-union rules when it comes to theater and music?
It really has to do with the sheer numbers of competition. Casting agents and representatives have to put people into piles because there's so many of us. And if they think of you as a musical theater actor, it's hard to break their expectations and get auditions for straight plays. It's just the way it is. However, it does seem to work the other way. If they think of you as a straight actor, then they'll agree to let you come in for a musical. And that's how it happened for me. I went in to audition for Titanic kind of on a whim. I hadn't auditioned for musicals in 20 years or something. I thought, well, why don't we give it a shot? And it wound up being a real life-changing experience because the piece was so great from top to bottom. And like I say, we swept our categories. And now here I am with my 2 first Broadway shows, both of them having won Best of in their category. And it just, I think that was another lucky break that gave me a seal of approval, so that the musicals I wound up doing on Broadway, the Spamalot and Sunday in the Park with George and The Last Ship and Billy Elliot, were all of a really Cabaret, were all of a very, very high caliber that I feel very, very fortunate to have done. But I've also gotten to continue to do the non-musicals, Cyrano de Bergerac and a play called Frozen, which isn't Frozen, it's a different one. And the Front Page, which I was in recently on Broadway. So I'm super lucky. That's all there is to it.
That is amazing. I mean, you've just been blessed with all these talents combining into one, and you know how to work it. And of course, you talked about having the special Tony Award in the Deaf West Revival Big River, a Drama Desk nomination. And what are some other awards you've also won or where you're nominated for?
Well, this was a very controversial play that happened in 1998, I believe, called Corpus Christi, that Terrence McNally wrote off Broadway. This was about the gay Jesus Christ. And we had huge uproar of protests before we would do the play and everything else. And as a result of that, it had an enormous amount of notoriety. I was cast as Matthew in it, and Joe Mantello, who was directing the play, also knew I was a musician and suggested as we go along that I come up with things for each individual scene. So I had my guitars there and my violins and my drums and keyboards, and we just rehearsed the piece and made up music as we went along. And by the time we opened, I had written the score for the play. It was not a musical, but it was scored in the same way as a movie would be. We had that much music going on. And now the play itself wasn't so well received, but my score was. And I wound up getting Drama Desk nomination for that, for writing the score as composer. And that was very exciting. The Tony, the secret, I call it the secret Tony Award that we got for the Deft West production of Big River, is also a great story. That show, for whatever reason, was truly a landmark show, but for whatever reason didn't make a commercial leap. And I think it was top 10 in everybody's critics' best list. It was just a beautiful, beautiful rendering of that show, using half deaf actors and half hearing actors. And very, very special. When I run into people who saw it, this was back in 2003, and people who saw it to this day, they'll well up with tears talking about how beautiful it was. And I share those sentiments. Anyway, the Tony Committee, I think, was a little miffed that we didn't make our commercial run and that we didn't win Best Tony that year. So they gave us what they called Special Tony Honors, and took us out to Tavern on the Green, and private ceremony with Brooke Shields. They gave every one of us a Tony, a secret Tony, on my wall, which is fantastic. Yeah.
That is just amazing too, and how these awards, coming out of it with plays that were critically acclaimed, but didn't win over the public. And you also have more going on as well too. And of course, besides working with Sting and everything else, who are some of your favorite artists and singers and actors growing up?
Growing up, oh well, the first person that leaps to mind was Charlie Chaplin. He was my idol when I was growing up. We shared a birthday. I was one of those kids. I had Chaplin posters all over my wall. Again, Canada comes up a lot in this. I think I had access to Canadian television stations, and at 4:30 every day there would be a Chaplin festival on. I'd run home from school and watch it, and it was it must have been a station that came out of London, Ontario, or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I had every one of his films memorized, the shorts, and I was a real Chaplin nerd. I had the books and knew all the names of the movies and who his co-stars were and everything else. I loved all the classics. I loved Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart and those guys. Just couldn't watch enough movies when I was growing up, and classic movies in the afternoon or something, or late night movies. We don't have late shows anymore, but we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had a James Dean thing for a long time. I guess those were the heroes. But also, I also had classical musician heroes. Aaron Copland, I was fascinated with, the composer. And I had a fantastic piano teacher who every week would give me breakdowns of different classical composers' biographies. So I was a big fan of Beethoven, that's for sure. And these were all my dudes, I guess, growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Always a mix of music and theater, always.
That sounds amazing too. And of course, talking about classical music, you listen to Bach and play Bach, and also Beethoven as well too. Who are some of the composers you also influence, like say with Mozart or Vivaldi or anybody like that?
Well, like I say, I think Aaron Copland was the biggest influence I had growing up. My mother was a choreographer. She was a modern dance teacher at the local community college. And she introduced me very early, or I don't know if she introduced me, she had it on the record player when I was growing up. We were listening to Billy the Kid and Rodeo, and she was a big Agnes DeMille fan. And I would listen to this music, the Billy the Kid suite by Aaron Copland, and I just it was as if I was watching a movie. The music was so clear what was going on. Here's the gunfight. Here's the chase across the prairie. Here's the damsel in distress, and here's the hero saving the day. And I just couldn't get enough of it. I'd play these records over and over again. And it was not usual. I would introduce these to my friends, and they would look at me like I was kind of crazy and want to listen to, something more pop, I guess. But that was just the world I was in. And then when I was, I started playing with my first orchestra when I was 10, the International Symphony of Sarnia and Port Huron. I was in the first violin section there. And then by the time I was 12, I got to do my first tour of Europe with an orchestra with the Blue Lake International Symphony, a summer camp that sent an exchange. And we went to Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Germany.
Nice.
And that trip, more than any other thing in my life, is what made me realize I needed to get out of Michigan and get into the world, because you take a 12-year-old, nothing against Michigan. Michigan's a beautiful place, but you take a 12-year-old and land them in Sweden and playing Gershwin and Copeland and traveling all over and eating the most delicious food he's ever had in his life, and seeing the most beautiful countryside he's ever seen in his life. It will make a difference,
You're making me hungry when you talk about food as well, too. And when you're traveling through Europe, what do you consider your most favorite countries? What was your favorite?
My favorite, well, yeah, I always have a hard time with any favorite of anything, but certainly those countries, the Scandinavia, have a very, very special place in my heart, because those were the first places I were in Europe. And I spent some time in Iceland right after college as well, a month there, and that country just blew my mind. I think it's the closest you can be to being on another planet, being in Iceland, the sun traveling the way it does when you're there, and the landscape and the people. But I was also fortunate enough to live in Vienna, Austria in the 90s for about 4 years. And I was living there primarily for the music at that time. I had already been in Heidi Chronicles on Broadway. This was between Heidi and Titanic. I had done a couple of jobs in Vienna and found that they were very receptive to, and I could make a little money as a composer and as a concertizing over there. So I did a lot of violin playing and piano playing over in Vienna. And that city is, I mean, how do you describe it? It's just, the art lives in every square inch of it. The architecture doesn't end, and it's part of its genetic makeup of the city is its artistic bones. And American cities don't quite have that level of commitment to the arts that, say, Vienna does. And well, I'm not sure any city does. It's pretty astounding.
That is amazing. It sounds electric. That's the word I was thinking of as well, too. So it's just amazing, what Vienna does as well, too. And of course, of all the projects you've done as well in musicals and everything, what do you consider your most favorite project and most challenging?
Well, I mentioned Titanic a couple of times, and it was very, very challenging. I consider Titanic my musical theater graduate school, because, like I say, I hadn't done a musical since high school at that point, and that was 20 years prior to being in Titanic. And as I say, I auditioned sort of on a whim, and they hired me as a swing or an understudy or a cover, and I had never done that before. And basically what it meant was I had to learn 5 roles as opposed to 1. And I had to cover the very best artists in musical theater that there were. And at the time, I could sing Almost Like Being in Love. That was the song I knew. And I could sing it obviously well enough that they thought I could do all these things. But I had no idea of what was actually going to be required of me when I took that job. And thank God, and it was both nerve-wracking and my saving grace that I didn't go on for about 8 months, because I was covering young, healthy men like myself who weren't going to miss a Broadway show if their life depended on it, or unless it was, a really enormous situation where they're going to miss a show. So I didn't go on for 8 months. And in that time, I had a chance to do catch up and really get myself into voice lessons 3 times a week and really, really learn this craft, so that by the time I was ready to be tossed on, I was there. And I think being surrounded by those people, that was Brian Darcy James and Marty Moran and Clark Thorell and Vicky Clark, Victoria Clark, Michael Cerveris, people who are now multiple Tony Award winners. And I mean, that was a cast of 40, and you could have built a Broadway show out of any one of the people who were in that cast. Don Stevenson, Emily Lesser. It was endless. And every one of those people wound up being my mentor and my lifelong friend. And I look back at it now, having done so many more musicals since then, and realizing that I now have the skills that I was dying to have when I was, already cast there and playing catch up. I will forever be grateful to Titanic. It was also just a great Broadway story putting that show together too. We had so many obstacles in our way. I don't know if you remember, but at the time it was the $10 million musical, which at the time was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of, it had the same Spider-Man story when Spider-Man was on Broadway, in that we were having enormous technical difficulties, and it made for a great newspaper article because we were Titanic and we couldn't get the ship to sink. Exactly. So it was the best hook. So when we had our first preview and the hydraulics stuck and the ship didn't sink and we had to cancel the show that night, we had the #1 headline story the next day in the news. So
oh my gosh.
And then we had lots of technical difficulties that we overcame. And because it was such a big, massive show, we weren't able to try it out of town as Broadway shows usually do and get all the mistakes ironed out. We had to do it on Broadway in front of everybody while everybody was watching. And like I say, it was a national news item.
Mm-hmm.
So when we did solve the problems of the play and wound up having a really terrific piece, it just was a really heightened experience that ended with us winning the Tony Award for Best Musical after being, in the early days of that, just being laughed off the stage. People were, ridiculing the piece early on.
Mm-hmm. It does sound amazing too. And I can imagine early days, I'm the king of the world.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I think of. And then it's like, had that famous scene where you hook up the famous two actors and actresses in history, Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. They'll be like, I'm the king of the world. And it's like, what?
Now you are confusing. I have to point out the movie from the musical.
I know I'm kidding. That's what I'm saying. I was kidding.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, of course. But, there was Titanic fever in the country at that point, because the movie did come out while we were on Broadway. It was the strangest phenomenon. It's all of a sudden everybody, after it lying dormant for, decades, all of a sudden everybody was crazy about the Titanic, so much so that a Broadway musical came out and the movie came out at the same time.
Mm-hmm. That's just amazing as well, too. And who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
Well, the first thought that came up is my mom, of course, in my life is my biggest influence. She is the one who made all this stuff possible. Asked me when I was 5 if I wanted to be if I wanted to play the violin, and my whole family was member of the community theater. So, it was a familial, and specifically my mother, she saw to it that I got to Interlochen Arts Academy for the last 2 years of my high school, which is really what led me to being able to go to NYU. And leaping to NYU, we were a poor family. It was a huge, huge sacrifice on the part of my family. Aside from that, I was very, very fortunate with my agency too, in terms of it being an influence on my career. At NYU, I was fortunate, again, enough to be seen by a very good agency while I was at the university. And from the moment I stepped out of college, I had representation and was able to, it's why I was on Broadway by the time I was 22, 23. So that's a huge influence. I guess that's it. I had a couple of college teachers who I still think of.
Mm-hmm. It sounds amazing as well, too. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
Regarding my career and pursuing this for kids, you mean?
Correct. Yeah. Either being a violinist, musician, Broadway actor, or anything like that, or show business.
Well, in show business, I'd say here's the thing is, when I was a kid with my piano teacher, she was very worried because she thought I was spreading myself too thin. she said, look, if you're going to be a pianist, be a pianist. If you're going to be a violinist, be a violinist. If you're going to be an actor, be an actor. But trying to do all these things, you're going to become a jack of all trades and a master of none. And I said, well, what if I was a jack of all trades and like a master of two? Would that be okay? Is that possible? And I think that's what I've come closest to doing. But nowadays in the theater, you know, it used to be a big thing to be a triple threat, to be a singer, a dancer, and an actor.
Mm-hmm.
But now that's assumed that you can do those three. That's happened in the last 20 years. Everybody assumes that you can have those skills. And now really what's wanted is if you have an instrumental ability as well, you're going to work even more. And I was pretty unique 20 years ago, having violin skills as an actor on Broadway. But these shows are all over the place now, because once Broadway producers figured out that people like me were out there and they could find them, it cut their costs down, because they could, you know, eliminate orchestra costs if you had actors who could play the instruments as well. Mm-hmm. And it's also damned interesting. There's no doubt about it. But so my advice would be is hone all your skills and don't let them go. Embrace them. I mean, how many people do you know who say, I run into this all the time and say, oh, I studied violin all the time I was growing up, but then I let it go, and I wish I still had it. And I always say, well, you still can get it. It's all there. It's just waiting for you. Mm-hmm. But for somebody going into show business, I'd say, don't let it go. You don't know what skill is going to come in handy, and you need them all.
Right. And that makes perfect sense too. It's almost like riding a bike. It's like once you learn, you'll never forget, just like with violin or anything else. So I think that's a great idea as well too. So, you know, just one more thing before we wrap it up. We know you're a very busy guy. It's been great having you on. I'd like to have you on again, Drew. Tell us about your upcoming projects, your Broadway appearances, and your website, and how do people contact you?
All right. Well, I was just down in Georgia at a great new theater called the City Springs Theater in Sandy Springs, Georgia, doing Billy Elliot. I just finished that last week. Love it. And this is a new theater company. I'm going to be back there in the autumn doing Mary Poppins, a role I've done before.
Nice. Oh, my gosh. Love Mary Poppins.
Love this theater company. They're really up and coming, and they've had an incredible, this was their first season, and they sold like 97% of their seats or something. Just a crazy success. And we're looking to expand their program a little bit. So I'm going to be going down there later this summer to see if we can start a young artists workshop or something, or musical development. I'm with the BMI music writing program as well. I think we mentioned that briefly. And I'm doing some theatrical producing right now. So I'm looking for opportunities to put these plays out that I have my name on. And that's going to be, I'm doing like 2 or 3 workshops of new plays that I'm actually not at liberty to discuss the titles of, because they're new musicals, but I'll be doing that through July and June. August, I might be able to take a break right now. I might go back to Michigan and see my folks. That's what I'm hoping. But in September, I'll be back doing Mary Poppins.
That'd be great as well, too. And what's your website, and how do people contact you?
People can contact me through Facebook, actually, is the best way to get a hold of me. I don't have a website that's just mine. I suppose I should. But you can contact me on Facebook. I'm just about filled to capacity there, but you can always get a hold of me there. And it's my name, Drew McVety.
That is great. Very impressive. Drew, just want to say thank you very much for your time. You've been very impressive. Look forward to having you back on soon, and like to wish you all the best down in Georgia and all your projects. And do everybody a favor and do me a favor. Keep us up to date what's going on, and look forward to having you on again soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Had a great time. Thank you.
Not a problem. That's been the Mike Wagner Show. I'm Mike Wagner. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on YouTube as well on the Mike Wagner Show. Take care.